Hello and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box, where today we go to War. And by that I mean a band that is arguably the most successful fusion band of all time. Now, War was a West Coast LA band through and through, and because of that, they showed all of the influences that they picked up, namely that wonderful mix of LA style funk and soul music combined with a very strong Latina influence. And the result was a sound that, even in an age where a lot of innovative fusion bands were ubiquitous, War always had a very unique sound. Now, the band began in a way that you might not expect. Eric Burdon, the lead singer of the Animals, had already been through two different incarnations of the Animals by the time you get to the very beginning of the 70s. And late 60s to be super specific. And he had grown tired with the sort of Animals name. He wanted to do something that was so different that he wouldn't dare use that name. So he started a kind of Latin rock, pop, funk fusion band called Eric Burdon and War. And they released two albums. The first was from 70 called Eric Burdon Declares War, and the follow-up from that same year was The Black Man's Burden. And these albums had a mixture of originals and covers. The most famous song from this era of Eric Burdon and War was Spill the Wine, a Latin-tinged pop song with sort of psychedelic lyrics that everyone likes to sing on karaoke night with or without substances helping them to groove along. But Burden then moved on, and the band continued simply as War, releasing a mostly fusiony without that sort of signature vocal album in 71 simply called War. And then the next album was All Day Music, which really helped them to solidify their sound because All Day Music was something of a hit. It was on the radio, and they even performed it on the Midnight Special and showed that they were one of the best bands to see live of that era. And they really just had so many great musicians in the band. There was Lonnie Jordan, who was argued, the band really didn't have a leader per se, but Lonnie Jordan was one of the people who was really at the forefront of the band, and he was obviously the keyboardist. Wonderful bass player, the late great B.B. Dickerson. Howard Scott, wonderful guitarist. Harold Brown, a very, very fine drummer. Papa D. Allen, who played the hand percussion, which again gave it that sort of rounded out Latin feel. There was Charles Miller, who played every sort of reed and woodwind instrument, whether flute or various kinds of saxophone. And then what would a band from LA be without a Danish harmonica player called Lee Oscar? And that was the classic 70s lineup of the band. And they really went from strength to strength. After All Day Music came out, they released what is arguably the best album of all time, which contains both the title track and the great song The Cisco Kid, who was a friend of mine. And this was, of course, 72's The World is a Ghetto, which I believe has just come out as like a super deluxe edition. There have luckily been a lot of War sort of reissues. Kevin Gray, the great mastering engineer, did a wonderful version of a greatest hits package, which, even though I would recommend listening to the albums, it is a pretty solid greatest hits package so far as that goes. Deliver the Word, another great album. Me and My Baby Brother was another song that got some airplay. And then in 75, they had another huge album with Why Can't We Be Friends, which contained, of course, the title track, and also contained what is most certainly their most enduring hit, which is Low Rider. And that I think is a memorable and sort of perennial hit for several reasons. One, it's got cowbell. I would say it's probably the most interesting song of all time where the more cowbell really does deliver. It's got a great harmonica part by Oscar. It's got a really fun lyric, and it celebrates lowrider culture, which was a big thing on the West Coast that began in the 70s and was sort of resurrected again later on in the hip hop era. And it's just cool. Songs about cars and car culture are always cool. And this was definitely one of them. They even did an album in the later 70s for Blue Note, which was still generally more of a traditional jazz label, but the song LA Sunshine from that two-disc album was really, really good. So definitely check out Platinum Jazz. By the time you get into the early 80s, some of the original members start leaving. You have a couple albums called The Music Band, which is what they wanted to call the band. They wanted to stop using the name War because some of the original members had gone away, but the record label insisted. But even these albums are wonderful. They literally never put out a bad album, and they were so good live. And that's why I would say that if you really want to say what was the ultimate fusion band of the 70s, you could look to the hyper virtuosic bands like Mahavishnu Orchestra, Return to Forever, Weather Report. You could look to the really jazzy, funky bands like the Headhunters. You can look to the ones that were more rock orientated, like Chicago or If, the great sort of the British version of Chicago, some people called it. And there's many ways to look at it. But I would say that for a band that fused so many genres together and had strong albums, great singles, and great live, I say War were really that ultimate fusion of all fusions. They fused so much together, but they went from success to success while doing so. So that's my piece on War. Like, subscribe. We will see you next time. Take care.